Welcome to another edition of the Litigation Psychology Podcast, brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. Dr. Steve Wood. Impromptu podcast coming from a hotel room on the road. Been seeing this a lot and just had a few things I wanted to talk about on the podcast. You know, a lot of times when we talk about witness training, we always talk about how we don't want witnesses to pivot, right? We want them to say yes, period, no, period. Own the bad facts. If it's a bad fact, just eat it and move on. But I've been seeing a lot lately from both my clients, witnesses, and even watching trials on court TV or watching depositions on YouTube, looking for new clips for presentations. Too often I see witnesses wanting to fight or attorneys wanting their witnesses to fight. You know, from an attorney's perspective, they'll say, well, I want my witnesses to score points. I want my witnesses to push forward this narrative. And sometimes they want to do it because they have our witnesses need to say something that the expert needs to use in their testimony. But more often than not, it's really just the fact that the attorney wants to feel like they're pushing the case forward, or they want the witness to feel like, you know, they have their back and that they know they're going to explain the story. So they give them the ability to jam things in, to insert pieces of information in there, to try to insert the narrative in there because it makes the attorney feel good. Same thing on the flip side with the witness. A lot of times, even if the attorney and myself are telling the witness, just eat it, just move on, the witness is saying, you know, well, I'm not just going to sit there and let opposing counsel run over me. And we see this a lot too, especially as you get up in organizations, you got your corporate reps or your C-suite individuals where they feel like they have to get their story across. They feel like they can't be pushed around and they can't be bullied by opposing counsel because of their position in the company. You know, and that obviously leads to a big problem because, as you said, you know, you feel good in the moment. You might feel like you get your side of the story across, but there's a lot of problems with pivoting. There's a lot of problems with fighting with opposing counsel, and you end up fighting battles that you really don't need to fight. And today what I want to do is walk through a few reasons on why pivoting / fighting / trying to add additional information into your responses is not good. You know, and the first one is you're essentially arguing with a professional arguer. You know, most witnesses, unless they're attorneys themselves, are in no position to try to get into an argument with opposing counsel about the case facts. You know, no matter how many times you're going to try to argue with them, you're always going to lose because essentially you're fighting a battle that you can't win with someone who has a lot better skill set than you. You know, it'd be like me trying to step into the ring with Mike Tyson with having a little bit of boxing experience and then all of a sudden saying, you know what, I have enough experience, I can step in the ring with Mike Tyson. How do you think that's going to last, right? It's not going to be very long until I get knocked out. Same type of thing when you think about a lay witness, even someone who's been deposed a few times, thinking that they can outmaneuver, outsmart, or outbattle an opposing counsel. I've yet to ever see it end well. You know, when you think about it too, is a lot of times witnesses will think, well, if I argue, if I push back, if I try to push forward my narrative, it'll show to the jury, it'll convince the jury that I feel confident in my position, or it'll convince the jury that I'm a good witness because I'm not going to be pushed around. But talking with jurors across the country in a lot of cases, it's actually the opposite. When they see these witnesses pivot, when they see these witnesses argue, when they see these witnesses try to be evasive, almost all the time we hear from jurors that they're not credible, right? Or the fact that they fight back doesn't gain them any credibility, doesn't make them look tough. And in fact, it makes them look more guilty because only someone who's not confident, only someone who feels like they did something wrong is going to try to convince the other person that they didn't do anything wrong. You know, it's like the little kid that tries to, when the parent asks them what happened and they go, but you have to understand, I didn't do anything wrong. You know, the harder you try to say you didn't do anything wrong, the more it looks like you did something wrong versus just trying to own it and say, yep, I did that. Yep, I could have did that. And that's one thing I always tell my witnesses too, that you always have to remember is just because opposing counsel thinks that you could have done something or the fact that you could have done something, just because you could have done something different does not mean what you did was incorrect. And I think that's one of the things you have to get witnesses to feel comfortable with is, yes, I could have done that. Yes, I could have made a different decision. Yes, I could have ran additional tests. Yes, I could have taken it a little bit slower. But the truth of the matter is just because you didn't does not mean anything as far as whether you're liable or whether you did anything wrong. So trying to argue once again with a professional arguer, is just not going to turn out well. The other thing too is a good cross-examiner is going to point that out. A good cross-examiner is going to say, objection non-responsive to that. Or they're going to say, I appreciate that, Mr. or Mrs. Smith, but that was an answer to a question, but not an answer to my question. So let's try this again. It's bad enough as it happens in deposition, but now imagine if you go to trial, you're doing that in front of the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. It doesn't take much for the attorney to turn and kind of look and go, thanks for that. And I understand that you want to try to add your additional piece of information, but see if you can stick with me and answer my question. Okay, can we do that? Can we have an agreement that you're going to answer the question that I'm asking you rather than trying to answer some other question that you want to answer? It's just enough of that there to alert the jurors that this person doesn't want to answer the question. So trying to do that, a good cross-examiner is going to catch you in that every single time. And that's even similar to what I hear all the time. One of my big pet peeves is the whole statement that someone will make before a response. If they're asking a legal type question, is the witness will respond, well, I'm not a lawyer, but da 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 da. It's not good, because I get why you're trying to do it, because you don't want to act like you're offering up a legal opinion. The problem is I've seen good cross-examiners go, sir, did I ask you if you're an attorney? I think it's clear to ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you're not an attorney. So I appreciate that. We know you're not an attorney. Now let's get back to my question. Just answer the question. There's no reason for you to add in additional information. Once again, a good cross-examiner is going to identify and point out those mistakes, and they're going to point out the fact that you're trying to be evasive. The second thing is, sometimes attorneys will say, well, I want them to have a little bit of fight. The problem is lay witnesses who haven't testified that much, don't know where to start and where to stop. So if you give them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of a leash to go out and say, I'm going to fight on this topic, but I'm not going to fight on that one, it's too difficult for a witness to know when to do it and when not to. So what ends up happening is they fight on whatever the one topic is that you want them to fight on. And then they say, well, this feels good. Yeah, this worked. And then now all of a sudden they're fighting on the next thing. They're fighting on the next thing. They're fighting on the next thing. So that's why I always tell witnesses, there's no reason to fight. Because once again, you won't know where to start and you won't know when to stop. And I even see that too with expert witnesses. Now, we give a little bit more leeway to expert witnesses to be able to explain things and give a little bit more detailed answers. But even expert witnesses, for as many times as they've been deposed, I've seen expert witnesses at trial get completely eviscerated by opposing counsel when they try to do the same thing. They try to fight on every question. Before you know it, they're fighting on things that they should just say yes to because they don't want to be, quote unquote, trapped in something. Well, then you look ridiculous, because then you look like as I like to say, you look like Bill Clinton when he couldn't agree with what is. You look foolish and you lose all credibility when you fight, So the point being is, for someone who doesn't know when to start and when to stop, you're better off not fighting at all, because that way you can avoid it in the first place. The other thing, as I said, you're not really going to convince jurors. So even though you fight, you might think it feels good and you might think you're convincing the jurors to your side of the case. The truth of the matter is you're not. And if anything, you might be hurting your case. As we've talked about many times on the podcast, the concept of confirmation bias, or viewing things through a certain lens. So what's going to happen is you're going to have jurors who are on your side, and they may view your fighting, your pivoting as acceptable. But the problem is, on the other side, you're going to have jurors who already don't side with your client, who already don't like your case. And now they're going to use that as just another example of why you're not credible. And an example I think about is Mike Lindell with the MyPillow deposition. If you watch that, I've used clips of Mike Lindell losing his mind in his deposition at speeches to talk about what happens when you get amygdala hijacked and you go off the rails. But if you go to the comments section, a lot of people are saying, I can't believe this guy's still in business. A lot of negative things about Mike Lindell. On the flip side, though, if you keep scrolling through the comments, you'll see some people who do side with Mike Lindell and who do say, yeah, that's right, fight him, Mike. This is a frivolous case. You need to show that opposing counsel that this is frivolous. So you do you keep doing it. Problem is it's the exact same deposition and exact same responses. But what happens is jurors are seeing it through different lenses. So what you're better off doing, once again, is playing more middle of the road, using the facts of the case, showing yourself to be credible. Then what you do is you're not becoming so polarized, in that you show credibly, so that it makes it a lot more difficult for those jurors who are not going to side with you to completely discredit the credibility of the witness. Now, is that going to mean they're going to completely believe you? No. But what you're doing when you're pivoting, when you're fighting, when you're trying to do all these things, is you make it a lot easier for those people who are against you to point that out and to hurt your credibility. So really the solution, as we've talked about before, embrace and elevate, right? Just own the bad facts, eat the bad facts. And if it's a fact, just say yes and move on. Okay. There's no reason to try to defend. There's no reason to try to run. There's no reason to try to pivot. Just own it and move on. The other thing you can do is reject and elevate, right? If you get something that says that you should have done something, and that because the fact that you didn't do it, somehow you're at fault. Once again, just disagree, own it, and say, you know what, I don't agree with that, period. Wait for the questioner to ask the follow-up. Sometimes they don't, right? And then it looks ridiculous, because now all of a sudden they say, you know, you'd agree with me, you should have done this. And you say, no, I don't agree with that. Now what? You know, a lot of times I've seen cross-examiners just move on and leave it there. The question is it because they don't want to ask the follow-up question because they know what the response is going to be? You know, well, that's fine. Let it put the ball in their court. If they want to leave it at that, then what they're going to have on the transcript is them asking a question of the witness, where they're trying to make an accusatory statement, where they're trying to place blame on the witness, and the witness says, I disagree. That's fine, right? That's a lot better than no, but blah, 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 and then have opposing counsel, the cross-examiner, then follow up with, oh, really? Really? That's your answer, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Or before you know it, you're opening other doors. Because what ends up happening too is when people start to pivot, they start to get clunky with their language. They start to, you know, kind of go into this fight or flight type mode. And then what they do is they end up saying things or doing things that they didn't necessarily mean to do. That leads to a longer line of questioning on certain factors that they didn't even think they were even going to get asked about. You know, for example, I was working with a witness one time, and he was talking about how they had separate databases that they used for certain cases. And he got asked a question, and he said, well, in this case, we use this database. Well, what do you think the follow-up question was? In this case, is a different database used for other cases? And then all of a sudden now it went down the path of asking additional questions about certain databases and whether they were used one for one type of case or one for another type of case. And what it really started to do is kill the credibility of this witness. And he was only saying it because he got into the fight or flight, I need to defend type mode. He stopped thinking about what word choices he was making and didn't realize that saying something that minor was going to open a bunch of doors. You know, and as much grief as everybody gives attorneys, I always say attorneys are great listeners, and they will listen and pick apart certain things and add a lot of different questions based upon something that you think had nothing to do with anything. So the more concise you can be, the more precise you can be, and the more you just own facts and keep it short and simple, you can move on and maintain your credibility. You know, and if someone feels like they have to fight of sorts, what I like to do is I go through and I talk with witnesses about 4 to 5, we call them major truths or safe harbors or flags that you can plant. And these are these 4 or 5 things in the case that you can talk with a witness and you can make them feel very confident that they're messages that they feel comfortable with pushing forward. But really what it is major truths that they can hang their hats on, and that no matter how much they get pushed, no matter how much they get pressed by opposing counsel, they can feel confident about it. You know, so for example, in a trucking case, one of the major truths might be as it relates to training, right? We properly trained our drivers. Our drivers do sufficient and proper pre-trip inspections. Our hiring practices are good. Our training practices are good. Those are the types of things that you want a whiteboard of sorts. And sometimes I will write them on a whiteboard. Sometimes I'll take a sheet of paper, one of those big papers that you can write on, like from an easel, rip it off and put it up on a wall and write those. But these are those 4 or 5 things that you work with a witness on that they say, okay, I feel confident about that. And a lot of the case is going to boil down around those 4 to 5 major truths. So that as long as they have it cognizant in their mind. So for example, in that trucking case, if you talk about our training is sufficient, our training is sufficient, our training is sufficient. Now what happens when you get asked a question by opposing counsel and they start talking about how you should have done more training, how it wasn't sufficient, how, with the driver, don't you wish they would have trained you more? If they would have told you this, you would have been in a better position to drive your vehicle. All those things, if you can kind of work with both the corporate side and the driver's side, that our training is sufficient, that is our major truth, then they can just say, no, I disagree. No, my training was sufficient. No, I don't think I need any more training. But those are the things, if you get them comfortable with that, if you get them comfortable with those topics, it helps them suppress that feeling to want to pivot, to want to fight. And it also, too, makes them more comfortable, especially when you're doing it with the witness and the attorney. Now they feel a little bit more comfortable. Now your attorney, now your witness are on the exact same page with one another, so that now that witness feels confident that the attorney has their back and that they're like, all right, we're all on the same page, that yes, I get it. You didn't do anything wrong. The way you did it, this was reasonable. The way you trained individuals was reasonable. So now they hear the attorney articulate that. So now they're on the same page. So now they don't have to worry that they have to feel like they need to jam that information in there, or they have to feel like they defend their company, or they have to feel like they defend their training, because if they don't, the attorney's not going to do it. So that's another thing too, is building trust between the attorney and the witness so that they know they're on the same page and on the same team. And when you do that, the witness also feels more comfortable, like, okay, my attorney has this. Okay, my attorney is on the same page. We're on the same script as far as what are the important pieces of information that are important to me as a witness, important to the case, and that my attorney's clear on that. So if the push comes to shove, they'll either ask me a follow-up question in a deposition, or at trial, we'll know when we're formulating our direct examination that that's kind of the key themes that we're working around. And in that case, it'll help them alleviate some of that concern on pivoting. So short podcast today, like I said, impromptu. It was one of those things I keep seeing. I'm talking to attorneys. I had an attorney the other day. Witness did really well at trial, but the attorney said to me, gee, I wish he would have fought a little bit more. And I thought in my head, are you kidding me? I mean, you know this witness, if you let this witness off the leash, this witness is going to lose his mind. So why do you want to put them in a position? Because you think it's going to make you feel better that they fought. It's going to make them feel a little bit better that they fought. But you have to look at the end game, right? What's the end game? The end game is a successful outcome to the deposition, a successful outcome to the case. It's not about that momentary feel of feeling good about the deposition, right? If you feel good in a deposition, you're probably screwing it up, right? If your witness is walking out of the deposition going, man, I feel great. I got everything off my chest that I wanted to get off. The chances are opposing counsel loves it, because you probably did something in there that made your case worse. If you come out of a deposition and it hurts, you probably did good. If you feel like you didn't get your soul side of the story across, you probably did good. Okay. Remember, keep your eye on the prize. It's kind of like kicking field goals in a football game, right? Or just, going back to Big Ten football, first down, first down, first down. Just keep grinding, right? At the end, you're going to get to the finish line, but it's the grind. You can't always try to take the Hail Mary every single time because you want to score the points immediately. Keep track what the end goal is. So with that, I'm going to sign off. This is a short podcast. As always, greatly appreciate all the listeners, appreciate all the feedback that we get. Keep it coming. Go to YouTube page, like, subscribe, check out our podcasts, our blogs, all the other papers that we have up on Courtroom Sciences. If you need anything, feel free to reach out to me at swood@courtroomsciences.com. This has been another edition of the Litigation Psychology Podcast, brought to you by Courtroom Sciences.